I'm Val Smith, president of Swarthmore, and I'm delighted that you're all here with us this weekend. Garnet Weekend is a fabulous opportunity to meet new people, to learn new things, to see our sports teams in action, and to have a good time. The annual McCabe Lecture is among the highlights of the weekend. In just a few moments, we'll hear from 1988 alumnus Thom Collins Jr., Executive Director and President of the Barnes Foundation, on the topic, Somewhere Better Than This Place, the Art Museum and Alternative Social Experience. But first, as is our custom, I want to say a few words about the lecture and its history. Thomas B. McCabe is a legendary figure at Swarthmore. The former chairman and CEO of Scott Paper Company, McCabe held several other important positions, including chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System and public governor of the New York Stock Exchange. Mr. McCabe believed deeply in the value of education, and he was widely honored for his contributions to the field. During his lifetime, he received honorary doctoral degrees from 15 colleges and universities, including Swarthmore and the Universities of Maryland and Delaware. President Harry Truman awarded McCabe the Medal of Merit for his contributions to education, business, and government. Mr. McCabe graduated from Swarthmore in 1915. His vision, foresight, and generosity have shaped our college profoundly for much of the past century. Generations of Swarthmore students have studied in the Thomas B. and Jeanette L. McCabe Library, the Scott Amphitheater, where new students celebrate first collection and graduating students celebrate commencement, was a gift from Mr. McCabe. He also established the McCabe Achievement Awards Scholarship Fund, which has awarded scholarships to some 300 students. Over the years, we've come to know them as the McCabes, and many of these students, both current and alumni, are here with us today. The McCabe Lecture, established in his honor and first delivered in 1986, reflects Mr. McCabe's commitment to education and his belief in young people's potential to make their mark in the world. Each year, the McCabe Lecture is given by an individual with a distinguished career in any of a wide range of fields, and this year that field is the arts. It's customary for the student president of the McCabe Society to introduce the lecturer. This year we have co-presidents, Kylie Carney and Will Black. I'd like to tell you a little more about Will, who will be introducing our lecturer. Will Black is a senior from Harleysville, Pennsylvania, and a graduate of Germantown Academy in Fort Washington. His older sister, Taylor, graduated from Wellesley in 2013, but we forgive her. Will is a midfielder on the men's lacrosse team and an honors economics major minoring in political science. Outside of school and sports, he enjoys music, photography, and hanging out with his two dogs, a black pug named Benny and a Bernese mountain dog named Scout. After graduating in May, Will plans to pursue a career in consulting. Please welcome Will Black. Will then introduce Thom Collins. Thank you.
Thank you, President Smith, and greetings to faculty, family, and friends. Happy homecoming. I have the honor of introducing the 2015 Thomas B. McCabe Lecturer, Mr. Thomas Collins, class of 1988. Established in 1986, the annual McCabe Lectureship brings individuals with distinguished careers in varied fields to speak on campus. The selection committee looks for candidates who emulate the late Mr. McCabe's character, leadership, and unfailing commitments to education and service. Known by his friends as Tom, Mr. Collins finds himself in good company as the 30th McCabe Lecturer. Over the years, the lecture series has included former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, former presidential candidate Michael Dukakis, astrophysicist Dr. John Mather, and most recently in 2014, Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, a MacArthur Prize-winning sociologist and professor of education at Harvard University. Mr. Collins is the executive director and president of the Barnes Foundation, one of the world's leading collections of French Impressionist and Post-Impressionist paintings, named for the collection's founder, the late Dr. Albert Barnes. A Philadelphia native, Mr. Collins joined the Barnes in March of this year after serving for 5 years as the director of the Perez Art Museum in Miami, where he oversaw construction of the new Herzog and de Meuron designed building located in downtown Miami. During his tenure, the museum achieved an overwhelming increase in membership, annual giving and attendance, and ushered in the introduction of new digital education tools. Prior to arriving in Miami, Mr. Collins held curatorial and director positions across the continental United States, starting as a fellow at MoMA in New York, to Seattle, to Cincinnati, Baltimore, and Purchase, New York. Mr. Collins holds a BA with honors in art history and the history of religion from Swarthmore, and an MA in art history from Northwestern University. Widely regarded as an innovative educator, accomplished art historian, administrator, and author, Mr. Collins is a leader in today's art world. He has a track record of leadership, community outreach, and a commitment to arts education. Now back at one of the places where he first learned about art, while growing up in the Philadelphia suburbs, Mr. Collins is excited to bridge the Barnes to the great academic community in and around Philadelphia, including Swarthmore. We are so excited to have him here today and to hear his presentation entitled Somewhere Better Than This Place, the Art Museum and Alternative Social Experience. Please join me in welcoming to the podium Mr. Thom Collins.
Thank you. And thanks to Will and to President Smith. When I received Connie Hungerford's letter inviting me to speak today, I really did think to myself, it's probably a bad idea to accept a lecture invitation when its text is more articulate and compelling than anything you've written in the last 20 years. But here I am, in spite of the fact that these days I spend far more time pressing the flesh with my other hand out, palm up, than researching, reflecting, and writing. I've enjoyed the opportunity to step back and engage in a little bit of auto-critique, and I am most grateful for this opportunity. So I thank you all very sincerely for having me today. It's more than a pleasure to be back at Swarthmore, where my love of art and art history were first inspired and nurtured by Professor Hungerford and her colleagues, Professors Kitao and Michael Cothran, the Dream Team. And it is really a privilege to have the opportunity to acknowledge here the extent to which the prevailing ethos of the college shaped my personal commitment to a critical social history and engaged museology. It seems only appropriate that this is what I share today. The evolution of my thinking and related curatorial and administrative activity as I've grappled with the unique and still largely underexploited potentials of the Art Museum to participate in processes of social change. My story has 3, I promise, very short chapters. In the first, What I Inherited, I offer my own assessment of the state of the field when I entered it as a curator at MoMA in 1993. In the second, What I Learned, I describe signal developments in art making and relational aesthetics into the mid-1990s that helped me find my own way forward as I became a museum director. And in the third, What I've Done About It, I offer a few concrete examples of my work on behalf of a more progressive arts institutional posture and practice. Chapter 1, What I Inherited, or The Limitations of the White Cube. A visit to the traditional art museum has all the hallmarks of a secular ritual, including ceremonial acts like the reverential pilgrimage from one carefully regarded object to another, and detailed procedures for carrying out these ceremonial acts, chief among them studied silence and the observation of a discrete distance from the art on view and from other visitors. The carefully orchestrated relationship among museum architecture, exhibition design and installation, and the nature and presentation of didactic materials, and by didactic materials I mean things like extended explanatory labels, brochures, audio touring guides, and other interactive digital technologies. These organize and further delimit experience. All of these elements taken together represent both the stage setting and script for the performance of museum visitation and have been called a ritual scenario, an expression that highlights their deep structuring function. The reigning architectural paradigm for the Museum of Art has come to be referred to as the white cube. This is the now very familiar featureless white box, characterized by the neutrality and opacity of its volumes, its rigid segregation of galleries from other public spaces, and of all public spaces from active work sectors. On the ascendant in the West, throughout the 20th century, the white cube and the approaches to museum display and interpretation that evolved in tandem together represent the most influential ritual scenario in the history of the public museum. It is a ritual that is at once limited by the nature of the historical discussions in aesthetics and museology that have guided its development, and limiting insofar as it not only privileges but actually prescribes one particular and particularly narrow kind of art experience. In her book, Civilizing Rituals, Carol Duncan points to the isolation of artworks from other artworks, obtrusive architecture, and didactic materials, and individuals from other visitors and the world outside the museum as the essential function of this white cube. One person, in contemplation of the apparent and thus largely formal aspects of one unique picture or object, is the irreducible unit in and fundamental dynamic of this museum experience. Duncan uses the word liminality to label the state of detachment and private reverie that this isolation is intended to inspire, and her argument suggests that this liminal state is asocial and perhaps even antisocial in nature. I think there are several important ways in which this is true. In gross terms, I think it could be argued that the white cube's physical segregation of art objects from the world outside and the limits its ritual scenario imposes on access to them suggest that art experience is radically distinct from, perhaps even completely unrelated to, the rest of life experience. It also isolates one experiencing individual from another, discouraging dialogue and debate that might otherwise be occasioned by a work or works on view. Finally, and perhaps most troubling, at least to me, it isolates works of art and the visitors engaged with them from the didactic materials that might otherwise provide valuable information, relevant details of artist biography, historical context, stylistic and symbolic traditions, and so forth. This severely limits the otherwise abundant possibilities for informed critical reception to the realm of the purely formal for all but an informed elite, regardless of the artist-maker's original intent. A focused account of three moments in the twined histories of aesthetics and museology, or the study and theory of museums, in Europe and the United States is essential to an understanding of the triumph of the white cube and this ritual scenario that it embodies. Both the public art museum and the aesthetic discourse relevant to this discussion were born in the late 18th century. The latter was first articulated by the philosopher Immanuel Kant in his third critique, the Critique of Judgment, which was published in 1790. Here Kant attempts to define aesthetic judgment as a special category of discrimination distinct from forms of rational activity. He describes aesthetic experience as a pleasure-inducing, quote, free play of imagination and understanding that arises from the contemplation of sensory data without reference to pre-existing concepts or structuring rubrics. Kant argues that we experience aesthetic pleasure, are able to judge the object or objects of our attention beautiful if its forms cohere in a manner that suggests purposeful design. This is, in his words, purposiveness, or the appearance of purposiveness, without purpose. Even if a larger meaning or meanings might be ascribed to a form or constellation of forms, some narrative in a painting, say, or some natural adaptation in a flower or tree, we are discouraged in this vein of aesthetics from pursuing it. Instead, we are encouraged to concentrate on and take pleasure in the appearance of the beautiful thing alone. Kant's privileging of aesthetic experience, narrowly construed, over other kinds of art experience, was highly influential for early museum professionals eager to distinguish themselves as a class of cultural worker with special knowledge and connoisseurship skills. In concert with critics, historians, and social reformers, they also moved beyond Kant's philosophical speculations to make a case for the power of aesthetic experience to transform and improve individuals and societies, not through education per se, but simply through transcendent encounters with the beautiful and the sublime. This advocacy was predicated on a metaphysical rather than materialist understanding of human consciousness and social change. Although consonant with the general Enlightenment emphasis on individualism and human progress, in its ultimately metaphysical underpinnings, this position would seem to have contradicted the empiricism that came to hold sway over the natural and social sciences in this period, as well as the support for a demonstrably rational exercise of human reason. The Enlightenment embrace of Kantian aesthetics did, however, offer one important avenue for realizing this broad agenda that had an enormous impact on the evolution of the museum's ritual scenario. It enabled the wresting of certain kinds of power from the church. As Carol Duncan writes, the creation of the public museum to make art with the power to transform lives accessible to the public can be understood as a transference of spiritual values from the sacred realm into secular time and space. After Kant, the transformative power of art objects was often discussed as distinct from, but on par with that of religious relics. It is not surprising, then, there's always this moment in an art history lecture. There we go. It's not surprising, then, that the spaces housed to build art in the West throughout the 19th century and into the early 20th were designed to resemble the Greek and Roman temples that were the sites of ceremonial worship of icons in the ancient world. The Greek Revival facade of the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, behind me, designed by Guy Lowell and completed in 1909, is a typical example. Many key elements of the ritual scenario now associated with this white cube, particularly the prescription of reverential behavior in visitors, were less new inventions than elements borrowed directly from religious worship. In 1918, a little more than a century after the publication of Kant's Critique of Judgment, Benjamin Ives Gilman, director of Boston's Museum of Fine Arts, published his pioneering book, Museum Ideals of Purpose and Method, which was the first comprehensive English language publication treating museum theory and practice. Following Kant, Gilman argues that the work of art must be judged not by the indirect worth it may possess, quote, through the grasp it gives us of the world, but the pleasure its simple contemplation affords. While Kant had no occasion to address the general mission of the emergent public museum, Gilman extrapolated one from Kant's aesthetics. The modern museum of art, he wrote, quote, is primarily an institution of culture, an affair of the feelings, of what are called the sensibilities, and only secondarily a seat of learning. During his tenure at the BMFA, Gilman did little to alter the already established ritual scenario that had evolved during the 19th century, but he did, for the first time, link it to an explicit philosophical rationale. The museum facility was still conceived as a secular temple. The presentation of isolated art objects as icons was still intended to encourage private contemplation, and the near absence of didactic materials, which you can see in this image, also the BMFA, was meant to encourage attention to the purely formal aspects of the works of art on view, suppressing all other meanings. But with select details of Kantian aesthetic philosophy as props, Gilman argued for a museum experience designed to encourage precisely the state of withdrawal from the day-to-day world, already referred to here as liminality. He identified the art museum as the seat of, quote, contemplative life, an existence devoted simply to becoming aware of things. And he argued for its protection from the other spaces in the world dedicated to the pursuit of what he called, quote, the active life, one which turns these things of which one has now become aware to purposes beyond themselves. Although Gilman performed a great deal of polemical work on behalf of the Aesthetic Museum, when he assumed the directorship of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, he inherited an established institution with a fairly well-programmed facility and encyclopedic collection. He had relatively little power then to make substantial change. Alfred Barr Jr., on the other hand, the founding director and chief curator of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, was able to build his facility and core collection from the ground up, beginning in 1929. Over the course of the institution's first decade, which culminated with the debut of its first purpose-built building — it had formerly been housed in a Rockefeller townhouse — Barr devised and implemented programs of collecting, exhibitions and public programs, exhibition design and installation strategies, and a philosophy about the use or non-use of interpretive materials. Together, these constitute what is widely regarded as the quintessential example of the white cube and its integral ritual scenario. Barr extracted from the work of Kant and his apologists a teleology, a doctrine explaining phenomena by their purposes rather than causes, that would explain a particular vein of historical aesthetics as part of a natural evolutionary process with its own internal logic and final causes. This doctrine, often referred to as formalist modernism, holds that the truly progressive and powerful arts of the mid-19th century and beyond are those in which purely formal aspects of the picture or object, the aspects by which Kant suggested the beautiful be judged, are taken as artistic subjects in themselves. The internal logics and final causes of this teleology involve the absolute distinction of each particular medium, painting, sculpture, photography, and so forth, from the others, and the purification of each distinct practice to its essential elements. For Barr, accordingly, the recent history of significant Western art involved all of the innovations that would lead to the invention of non-representational, non-objective painting or sculpture. This mode of non-referentiality would, he believed, guarantee more immediate access to the liminal state. Barr devised criteria for building and presenting the museum's permanent collection that followed the logic of Gilman's ideals to their extreme conclusion. Early in his tenure, he articulated systematizing and taxonomical procedures to organize the growing contents of the museum's permanent collection. When he could, he acquired and accessioned works of art that seemed best to illustrate his evolutionary model, rather than, say, collecting encyclopedically, broadly. He then divided and classified these works, first according to medium, and then according to style or movement, Impressionism, Cubism, Surrealism, and so forth. He installed them in galleries segregated by medium, in near-perfect chronological groupings, and typically with little or no supporting didactic material, save identification of artist, title of work, date, medium, and the all-important donor credit line. In this way, Barr created installations in which the pictures and objects on view seemed to illustrate their own medium-specific teleologies. And I'm showing you an installation from the first permanent collection installation of the painting and sculpture collection from '39. Barr's scheme for the installation of the permanent collection was perfected with MoMA's move into this current home in 1939. Designed by architects Philip Goodwin and Edward Durrell Stone, the structure has remained at the core of the MoMA facility through several subsequent campaigns. The exterior of the marble, steel, and glass edifice with its crisp lines, precise geometries, and machined surfaces, decisive breaks from the antique revival tradition in museum architecture, was intended as a clear signifier of the institution's modernist aspirations. Entered through a low, discreet, canopied entrance and neutral lobby, and this is, by the way, still at the center of the building plan today, the galleries, now painted white and stripped of all detail and ornament, unfold as a directly linear progression of rectilinear volumes. Conceived as the perfect complement to Barr's permanent collection installation scheme, the facility functions as a hybrid now of the temple and the laboratory, with its hygienic spaces and rigidly structured system of presentation. With the completion of the Goodwin and Stone building, the white cube had been realized in its paradigmatic and most influential form. In the introduction to the catalog for his 1991 MoMA exhibition, Dislocations, curator Robert Storr, Swarthmore class of 1972, eloquently and concisely summarized the most salient features of the white cube, its history, purpose, and ideological underpinnings. He wrote, "This austere box is the essential architecture for essentialist painting and sculpture. In it, an ideally disinterested viewer confronts autonomous objects whose function is to focus the troubled mind. Extreme contingencies or mundane encumbrances are not permitted to pass the entrance to this rarefied realm and so interrupt the mute exchange. Here Storr articulates the clear and overdetermined relationship among the nature of the white cube's physical spaces, the arts those spaces are destined to contain, the way that art is to be presented, and the experience these elements together are intended to engender in visitors. He suggests the personally ameliorative potential of this liminal experience, but he also reminds the reader of the deliberately antisocial nature of this rarefied realm and of the many blindnesses that are the side effects of the white cube's prescriptive experience. Primary among these is a blindness to, in fact, an active denial of, historical artistic intentions, illustrative, didactic, polemical, and so forth. These intentions that have made even the most traditional visual arts a preferred vehicle and powerful force for social change. This is the curatorial practice and museological paradigm that first shaped my understanding of museum purpose and method. Chapter 2, What I Learned Somewhere Better Than This Place. Just as I was being indoctrinated, and I use that word advisedly, just as I was being indoctrinated at the Museum of Modern Art, I was also encountering a host of new artist projects that helped me shape an alternative conceptual frame for myself, none more exciting and compelling than those of Cuban-American artist Felix Gonzalez Torres. For his 1990 solo exhibition inaugurating the Andrea Rosen Gallery in New York City, Gonzalez Torres created as a centerpiece Untitled, one of his now signature giveaway sculptures. Resting on the floor in the middle of the pristine gallery, the work comprised 2 stacks of white rectangular paper sheets, each in one stack inexpensively printed in black with a single line of text reading, "Somewhere better than this place." Each in the other stack reading, "Nowhere better than this place." Situated not side by side or one above the other, an organization that would suggest a certain priority, but rather with their top edges adjacent and aligned, each physical stack of paper described the mirror image of the other. Visitors to the exhibition were invited to take away a sheet of paper from one or both stacks. In the absence of its companion, each of these 2 texts could be read as a neat label for the exhibition itself, the new Andrea Rosen Gallery, or several of the larger physical, social, and ideological contexts in which it might be understood: New York City, the United States, democracy, the West, and so forth. It might be read as designating either a problematic somewhere better or a perfect nowhere better exhibition, exhibition venue, or communal life. Taken together, the texts seem to contradict and thus neutralize one another. For one viewer, the imagined thing to which the texts refer cannot be both the inevitably flawed real and the ideal, at least not at the same time. As Nancy Spector, curator of the Felix Gonzalez Torres retrospective, wrote a decade later, the pair of texts taken together induce a sensation of paralysis, a feeling of immobility. But then the 2 texts can't be taken together in the sense that they cannot be read simultaneously. Gonzalez Torres devised a presentation for them that demands that the viewer walk around the 2 stacks to read the texts. This physical movement, the viewer's circling around and around, relates directly to and reinforces the cognitive, evaluative oscillation that's structured into the reception of the work and encouraged by a consideration of the significance of these paired texts. The viewer is invited to test her or his options, to weigh relevant contexts against one another and or some imagined ideal, and, in choosing to take a sheet from one or both stacks, carry it back to some other place, some other space, with its own physical coordinates and relevant social and ideological contexts, and hang one or both in some order that may or may not prioritize one over the other. To decide this issue, is there somewhere better than this place I am or not, for her or himself? The responsibility for participating in the work, for actively testing its critical implications and making and living with decisions informed by these activities, is placed squarely on the viewer. About the same time that he created Untitled, Felix Gonzalez Torres wrote, quote, "Once we believe that there is no God, that there is no afterlife, then life must become a positive statement. It becomes a political position because then we have no choice but to work harder to make this place the best ever." End quote. This statement makes the artist's critical perspective clear. Aware of and concerned about troubling aspects of contemporary social life, he was deeply committed to the idea of the artistic product and to the experience of art in all the spaces in which it might be encountered, most specifically public institutions, as socially ameliorative, the work of art and the museum as agents of positive change. In an interview with the artist Tim Rollins regarding his 1990 exhibition, in which the piece Untitled appeared, Gonzalez Torres was explicit. He said, quote, "I do have a very clear agenda, and that is a desire to make this place a better place." Having weighed the various contexts pertinent to his own life and work against perfected models of themselves, he found them all wanting. They all fell short of the ideal, and Gonzalez Torres invited viewers to do the same, with the progressive goal in mind of creating change, of edging real life in the direction of utopian models. He had arrived at this commitment during the 1980s in his work with the artist collaborative Group Material. Founded in 1979 by Julie Alt, Mundy McLaughlin, and Tim Rollins, Group Material was a New York organizing and exhibiting entity that worked with a constantly evolving roster of artists, community activists, and members of the general public to mount teaching exhibitions in museums, galleries, and alternative spaces. Excuse me. With social communication and political change as explicit goals, Group Material mounted a number of important shows throughout the 1980s that treated pressing issues such as gender inequality, homelessness, and the AIDS pandemic. At first working largely in rented storefronts and other non-traditional venues, members of the collective mixed art objects with found materials and both appropriated and original texts in carefully orchestrated presentations. Group Material is best remembered for such projects in this vein as the AIDS Timeline of 1989, a multimedia installation not unlike a three-dimensional photo essay that employed fine art and materials from popular culture, the mass media, and the sciences to recount the recent history of the AIDS pandemic in the United States and a host of powerful responses to it. It was Group Material's breakthrough exhibition, however, that set the tone for what was to come and provided a powerful model for Gonzalez Torres. And this is, I must say, the only, it's a terrible picture. It is the only surviving photograph of this project. People's Choice, as it was called, People's Choice of 1981, was an exhibition mounted in a rented storefront in the largely Hispanic and economically disenfranchised neighborhood of New York's East Village. Members of Group Material went door to door on their block with a letter inviting, quote, friends and neighbors of 13th Street to contribute to the exhibition. Quote, things that might not usually find their way into an art gallery, the things that you personally find beautiful, the objects that you keep for your own pleasure, the objects that have meaning for you, your family, and your friends. Choose something you feel will communicate to others. If there's a story about your object, write it down, and we will display it along with your thing, unquote. And of course, this is part of the resulting installation. An enthusiastic response left the members of Group Material with a vast array of pictures and objects, from family photographs to religious icons to toys. Displayed together alongside the personal testimonials of the people who contributed them, these items told stories about the individual experience and communal life in one tight-knit community. The nature and organization of this project, in particular, the way it conceived the relationship between the work of art, the exhibition space, and the social world just outside the gallery door, represented a significant break with historical art making and institutional exhibition practices. The most important critical insight mobilized in the organization of the People's Choice, one that Gonzalez Torres clearly internalized during his lifetime and work with Group Material, has less to do with any one specific area of social, political, or economic critique or advocacy. What Gonzalez Torres no doubt learned, and what is simultaneously explicated and staged in his piece Untitled, is the unique power of the work of art in which important and progressive ideas are expressed through novel and therefore uniquely compelling forms or formal languages to change the way individuals think, feel, and behave. in this way to change the social relationships, communities, nations, and the world we share. Untitled eschews traditional aesthetics and instead actively scripts an alternative relationship among individual audience members, art objects, the spaces that contain them, and the world of social relations beyond. By tying participation to social critical reflection and potentially positive social actions in and beyond the exhibition space, this work not only discourages, but actively disallows the detachment and private reverie privileged in the most influential strain of modernist art practice and programmed into the form and functioning of the white cube. While González-Torres' Untitled stops short of identifying specific problematic aspects of contemporary social life and explicitly modeling alternatives to them, it serves as a clear introduction to the structure and central features of artworks and art institutions designed to participate in catalyzing social change for the good. The pair of texts, Somewhere Better Than This Place and Nowhere Better Than This Place, are directly related to a suggestive aspect of the derivation of the term utopia, one that sheds light on the piece itself and on the larger dynamic that it simultaneously describes and animates. The word utopia was invented in 1516 by Thomas More as a proper noun in his classic Renaissance humanist treatise on moral philosophy titled Concerning the Best State of a Commonwealth and the New Island of Utopia. He invented the word to label a fictional island in the Atlantic Ocean where the hero of his travelogue discovers a community that is perfect in its social, political, and economic organization. Not surprisingly, given Thomas More's own role as a progressive public servant, the organization of this fictional island of utopia in his treatise is perfect in such a way that it reads as a direct proposition for improving 16th century England, with its, quote, monstrous inequality, hideous poverty, and vicious political corruption. The imaginary utopia was clearly Thomas More's prescription for the improvement of a very real and very troubled nation. To name his exemplary but fictional place, Moore invented a word that contains a very telling paradox, one that sheds light on this entire project of social change and that, not coincidentally, animates González-Torres' Untitled. The proper noun utopia quickly passed into usage as the common noun utopia, lowercase u, a general term to describe any place with a perfect, ideal political and/or economic organization and functioning. It was created by Moore, who combined the Greek root topos, meaning place, the adverb ou, which means not, and a Latin ending. Thus, a utopia is literally no place. Contemporary audiences would have also realized that the name was a pun on another Greek compound word, utopia, E-U-T-O-P-I-A, meaning happy or fortunate place. Think EU, euthanasia, for example. Moore played with this modification of the root topos precisely to indicate that a utopia is by definition a good place that is also, in its perfection, unrealizable, always no place. Since the 1960s, the rich implications of Moore's wordplay have been explored by a succession of distinguished thinkers. Literary theorist Louis Marin was fascinated by the fact that Moore, in naming his fictitious geography, had devised a term both describing but also encouraging the movement of thought back and forth between the concretions of reality and the abstractions of idealization. He highlighted the function of a utopia as the imaginary, purely textual space between the facts of the world and the ideal models with reference to which it might be improved. As early as 1968 and well into the 1980s, philosopher Michel Foucault considered real spaces in the modern world that he thought offered an actual experience analogous to Marin's purely textual spaces. In his essay Of Other Spaces, he argues that these real places are the locus of communicative and concrete acts and engagements among people that involve attempts in real space and real time to reconcile some aspect of the imperfect world with some utopian vision for its perfection. Among the examples he uses are mental health facilities, fairgrounds, libraries, and prisons. Alternatives to really existing social conditions are not only debated in such places, but they are modeled and actually tested. Foucault devised the term heterotopia, which translated, of course, means literally different spaces, different places, to describe them. recognizing that such spaces have meaning and value because they exist in a state of perpetual difference from the aspects of the world they aim to improve. The traditional utopia is, by contrast, fixed in its perspective. When the nature of the social matrix shifts and social life changes, so must the heterotopia. The heterotopia is absolutely different from all the sites it reflects and speaks about. In Foucault's conception, Thomas More's ideas of the good place are transformed in the heterotopia not into a perfect society, but into spaces for the perfection of society and the individual within it. The idea of the heterotopia has been most eloquently explained by cultural geographer Kevin Hetherington in a 1997 book called The Badlands of Modernity. He describes heterotopia as those spaces in which a new way of social ordering emerges, one that stands in contrast to the taken for granted, mundane idea of social order that exists within society. Concluding his account, Hetherington employs language that is recognizably related to that of González Torres' Untitled. He writes, quote, "The no place, good place ambivalence contained in Thomas More's original pun when he coined the term utopia contains within it one of the definitive influences on modern uses of the idea of utopia, that is, the attempt to order space or particular spaces that were nowhere and produce the conditions of an ordered and stable society that is somewhere." Felix González Torres mobilizes More's paradox in Untitled in order to animate the potential of the work of art and the institution in which it is presented to function heterotopically, to catalyze positive social change. Activating Untitled by taking one or the other sheet, or both, considering their implications, and then moving out into the world beyond the exhibition space, the viewer is encouraged to become an engaged participant in the exploration of any number of possibilities for making her or his world, in the words of González Torres, the best place ever. During the second half of the 1990s, I deepened my engagement with the work of Felix González Torres, like-minded artists and critics, and evolved my personal practice accordingly, definitively leaving behind the paradigmatic, but as I finally discovered, problematic white cube. Chapter 3, and this is the short one, I promise. What I've done about it, the museum as heterotopia. Since 2000, I've had the opportunity to lead 4 art institutions: the Contemporary Museum Baltimore, the Neuberger Museum of Art, the Miami Art Museum, which was renamed to Perez Art Museum Miami, and as of April, the Barnes Foundation. To the extent that I've been able, I've worked consciously and diligently to activate each of these museums as a heterotopia in ways specific to its particular context. I want to close by sharing a little digest, 6 key strategic and practical lessons I've learned, some takeaways, illustrated when relevant, in order to make some of these abstractions that I've just presented a little more concrete. Lesson 1, and this may be self-evident, but nonetheless bears repeating. For a public art institution to be catalytic within the social matrix in which it is situated, its board, staff, audiences, changing exhibitions and programs, and, to the extent possible, its permanent collections must mirror the diversity of the community in which it operates and, perhaps more importantly, the community it aspires to serve. Lesson 2. See, I told you these were going to be tight. I promised. Lesson 2. To catalyze social change, the art presented must possess the power to change the way individuals think, feel, and behave. The art with the greatest potential to stimulate this change is that in which alternative ideas are wedded to novel and compelling forms. For those of you interested in theater, you'll recognize that this is an insight of Bertolt Brecht. I wish I could own it myself, but it is in fact Brechtian. Lesson 3. All art must be presented with didactic support that makes relevant aspects of the social historical context of its production clear, thus facilitating meaningful reception for viewers, even those operating at a significant cultural and historical remove from producers of the art in question. This is the creating a meaningful horizon of reception. Lesson 4, the museum facility should be conceived as a public forum, its physical envelope actively bridging art experience and the rest of life experience, promoting social gathering and dialogue between and among viewers, and resisting the framing of monolithic master narratives in all of its presentations. We embraced this lesson in Miami, and it guided us in the creation of the new Paris Art Museum, which opened in 2013. Designed by Herzog and Demuron and based on a tropical vernacular form, the building, at almost 240,000 square feet, features almost 80,000 square feet, or 1/3 of total square footage, of free, sheltered outdoor space for social gathering. An enormous louvered roof shades the building perimeter from direct sunlight and enables glass-walled galleries that offer views of art from outside and the land and cityscape from its galleries. Always one is reminded of the connection of one to the other when one is either inside or outside the perimeter of the building. Exhibition spaces are organized in clusters rather than the more traditional enfilade, that sort of regular progression of boxes, resisting actively linear narratives and enforcing a more complex and polyvocal approach to storytelling. If ever there were a city, by the way, that demanded a polyvocal approach to storytelling, I would say it's Miami, right? So the idea is that the linear box insists on a certain kind of the linear progression insists on a certain kind of storytelling. A cluster of spaces like this one, the left is the floor plan of one of the gallery floors, a cluster of spaces insists on a much more self-conscious approach to installation and storytelling and makes possible, if not actively insisting upon, multiple points or approaches to the act of storytelling. And, of course, multiple gathering spaces are woven deliberately into the fabric of the galleries to house formal education programs, yes, but also to promote informal dialogue and debate prompted by the art on view between and among viewers. So on the left, for example, is the major circulation stair from the first to the second gallery floors, and you'll notice that it's configured both as a stair, but it's also configured as a seating space, sort of roughly inspired by the Spanish steps, where people spend all day gathering as they move from one place to another. Lesson 5. The museum must also always be conceived and activated as a headquarters from which heterotopic processes of all kinds are organized and promoted throughout the fabric of the community it serves. Those I've been able to launch include art-centered service to people with Alzheimer's and their caregivers, and homeless families in long-term shelter placements. Next up, I hope and planned at the Barnes, we're also going to reach out to the incarcerated populations of Philadelphia and veterans with post-traumatic stress syndrome. All populations for which there is a demonstrated therapeutic benefit of certain art-related activities. Lesson 6. Perhaps it goes without saying, but not all art is relevant to the project I'm describing. I found that and by the way, this is where you get art. If you've been waiting to see some art, now you get to see some art. So I promised, here it comes. I found that 4 overlapping categories of artistic and related institutional inquiry with both historical and contemporary relevance have the greatest potential to initiate autocritique, the kind of self-evaluation and systemic change I've been describing. With each, I offer one example from my own curatorial resume. The first category, art which explores the social construction of identities. Since the advent of figurative representation, claims about such identity categories as gender, race, ethnicity, class, and sexuality have been advanced in visual culture. And since the 1960s, they have increasingly come under scrutiny for their debilitating essentialism, their tendency to rely on the largely unverifiable attribution of inherent and unchanging characteristics to whole classes of people. As the various social, political, and economic agendas that have perpetuated these claims have been revealed and examined, they have been cast into doubt. Artists and heterotopic institutions have responded to this critical activity by exploring the social sources of identity claims and weighing their personal and political implications. Nikki S. Lee's Projects series, behind me, made between 1997 and 2001, offers a clear and provocative example of activity in this category. Lee moved to the United States from South Korea in 1994 to attend art school. She had few personal contacts and little English. She subsequently made her process of acculturation the subject of her art, with the support of several visual arts institutions, producing 14 extended investigations of distinct North American subcultures, among them those of senior citizens, sex workers, punks, hip-hop groupies, skateboarders, and trailer park residents in Ohio. I know, right? A joke that tells itself. These investigations were not strictly sociological because Lee chose to assimilate rather than observe, to become part of each group in order to understand its participants and dynamics from within. Always upfront about her heritage and artistic ambitions, she would nonetheless transform her appearance as much as possible to conform to group norms, and then would work sincerely to become an accepted community member. Sometimes lasting months, Lee's projects, documented in an archive of candid snapshots, like the ones behind me, taken by her new friends and acquaintances and presented as such in the museum, demonstrate the fundamental mutability of human identity and the inadequacy of socially sanctioned and essentializing categories of difference as explanatory tools and mechanisms of social control. The second category, discourses of social order. A vast array of discourses generated in fields as diverse as science, law, philosophy, political science, medicine, anthropology, theology, and so forth have given rise to and governed individual thought and action, as well as the interactions among individuals that constitute the social world. In this sense, different discursive constellations might be said to order and thereby govern communal life, most often in barely acknowledged ways. Artists and heterotopic institutions have strategically revealed and critiqued what are perceived as central or problematic social discourses in order to undermine and displace them, and to replace them with more progressive systems of thought and belief. Pepón Osorio's Badge of Honor, Father's Prison and Son's Bedroom of 1996, is exemplary of activity in this category in the sense that it strategically draws the viewer into a nuanced investigation of the discursive and material underpinnings of the existential extremes freedom and subjugation. Osorio's installation environment juxtaposes a sparsely furnished prison cell with the bedroom of a young boy, a room literally bursting with new consumer goods. Each room also contains one half of a synchronized video dialogue between an incarcerated father and his real son. They discuss their respective circumstances and the impact these circumstances have on their relationship. The video actually creates a dialogue that they cannot have in real life. Emotionally devastating, the piece ultimately reveals the deep and powerful connection between economic privilege, or lack thereof, and a host of important discursive formations in law, social theory, and psychology, a relationship that controls the social sanction of individual freedom. The third category, changing patterns of social relations. There is a fundamental level at which human activities and interactions are a matter of routine conditioned by both circumscribed identity categories and rigid social orders. As a result, significant shifts in consciousness have to precede deliberate material changes in the world of human relations by re-examining and revaluing daily ritual, as well as encouraging, in some cases, directly facilitating new kinds of interpersonal encounters inside and outside the museum. Critical artists and heterotopic institutions have been able to disrupt the fabric of social life in order to encourage thought about and action toward social change. Untitled Free Still of 1995 is one of Rick Tiravania's earliest experiments in this vein. Working with museum staff, we organized this project at the Contemporary Art Center in Cincinnati. Tiravania supplanted routine gallery activities with the continuous activity of preparing and serving a free Thai curry to visitors. The exhibition space was transformed into a makeshift kitchen with the introduction of a few small appliances and cookware. All other elements of his cafe were pulled directly from museum offices and storerooms. As meals are prepared, served, and consumed through the run of the show, waste from the process, including empty bottles and cans, used utensils, and leftovers, accumulate and become part of the installation. Untitled Free Still strategically replaces a culture of looking with a participatory ritual. The audience becomes an active part of the installation performance. For without viewers to consume the food prepared by museum staff, the work is incomplete. Tiravania's provisional kitchen is merely a device to encourage the communication and the service that is the actual subject of the work, and the most often unfulfilled promise of cultural institutions. The museum context offers a frame in which the larger implications of this activity, particularly for art practices that lack direct social relevance, can properly be understood. And the last, sublime social, and probably the most fun, because it actually looks like art, sublime social encounters. The sense of mingled awe, fear, and wonder inspired by encounters with transcendent, immeasurably vast phenomena identified as sublime, and privileged in certain aesthetics has, as we discussed at the outset of this talk, most often been conceived as the outcome of an encounter between one viewer and one image or object. While this encounter may well be recalled and discussed with others after the fact, it has traditionally been conceived as a matter of private experience. By wrenching the phenomena at the heart of the sublime out of the picture plane and into shared public space, on occasion, these phenomena have been made central to interpersonal encounters, and thus the locus of potentially transformative dialogue and collective action. Inigo Manglano Ovalla's monumental cloud prototype of 2003 confronts its audience with the specter of that awesome and terrifying human creation, the atomic bomb. This enormous titanium-clad piece, based on a composite computer image generated from data on real cumulonimbus clouds, hangs ominously over the viewer's head. From different angles, the form reads as both a swirling thundercloud and a mushroom cloud. Here, Manglano Ovalla updates the visual vocabulary of the Romantic sublime, conflating a dramatic staple of 18th century landscape painting, these dramatic clouds, with the haunting, iconic image of the aftermath of a nuclear detonation. Designed and scaled deliberately for an outdoor public space, Cloud Prototype inspires the full range of responses associated with the sublime, but remakes the public monument in a provocative and potentially incendiary fashion. And the final lesson, and I have to say I've learned this only relatively recently, falling as I do on the wrong side of the digital divide. The most effective art institutions now are those that launch virtual cognates to all of the aforementioned artistic, educational, and social services activities online and offer them free of charge. I'm convinced that all cultural institutions must in future become nonprofit media companies if they are to survive and thrive. We can reach, we know this, many multiples of the audience we welcome to the physical museum in cyberspace. I have, as you can see, learned many lessons, and I hope to learn many more on this journey. But taken together, these 6 offer the clearest alternative I've discovered to the antisocial experience programmed into the white cube. Let me close with a final reference to Felix Gonzalez Torres, whom you can probably tell is my lodestar. In Untitled, he offers a powerful formula for an indispensable kind of art and art institution. These make individuals and subpopulations visible, regardless of their real or imagined marginality. They bring them together to represent themselves to one another and the world beyond the museum in ways that encourage communicative and material exchanges that about and across differences. These communicative exchanges involve investigation, critique, and cooperative rethinking of the deep and deeply flawed systems of thought and belief that structure all human interactions. And these material exchanges aim to correct social ills that such flawed systems promote. It is and always will be an ongoing process because the specific goals of this art and these institutions, which I've described as heterotopic, associated with the eradication of prejudice, the alleviation of suffering, and the elevation of the human spirit, are necessarily shifting, changing all the time. The larger goal of this heterotopic art and these heterotopic art institutions is, however, unchanging, to make this place, any place, the best place ever. Thank you very much.